Hello, class. The policy-related news coverage that I decided to present is a news article that I found on the Washington Post, and it is entitled "Boy 7 was tortured to death and fed to pigs. State agencies failed him," says lawsuit. Isolated from outsiders and confined in filthy mice infested houses where he was homeschooled, Adrian Jones suffered at the hands of his father and stepmother and was meticulously documented through dozens of surveillance cameras. As his family moved from place to place across Kansas and Missouri, his stepmother captured photos of the horror images stored online and later recovered by authorities. In several instances, Adrian was shown strapped to a table and blindfolded, or standing in neck deep water in the family's dirty swimming pool overnight. In other photographs, his mouth looks bloody and bruised, his teeth are rotten, his hands are swollen from being restrained. And in another picture, Adrian appears to be tied up with a plate of food in front of him and a bar of soap in his mouth. The young boy was trapped in a white tiled shower stall and left to die. Prosecutors said that Adrian essentially starved to death, and his body was fed to pigs. The young boy's remains were found in a livestock pen on the family's property. His father, Michael Jones, told authorities he purchased the swine after keeping the body inside the home for nearly 2 weeks. A child told investigators he heard Adrian screaming, "I'm going to die," through a vent, and his stepmother, Heather Jones, telling him to suck it up. For Adrian's first 2 years of life, he lived with his biological mother and siblings in Lawrence, Kansas. After the toddler was found home unsupervised, he was removed from his mother's home and placed in the custody of his father. But within 3 months of Adrian moving in with his father, Kansas child welfare workers became aware of problems in the home. Hotline calls began pouring in with troubling information. His father had guns all over the house, and his stepmother was observed to be high on drugs, according to the lawsuit. The policy that this article correlates to is the child welfare policy. The main provision of the child welfare policy is to ensure that children have safe, stable, and permanent living situations. Under the U.S. Child Welfare Policy, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974 was created. This act established the National Center for Child Abuse and Neglect within the Department of Human and Health Services and presented a model statute for state child protective programs. Among its provisions specified the following: 1. A standard definition of child abuse and neglect. 2. Methods for reporting and investigating abuse and neglect. 3. Immunity for those reporting suspected injuries inflicted on children. And lastly, prevention and public education efforts to reduce incidents of abuse and neglect. As a result of these national standards, the National Center for Child Abuse and Neglect was able to report trends in child abuse and the need for protective services. Records in both Missouri and Kansas reveal a seemingly endless series of reports and hotline calls that inform social service and child welfare agencies of the abuse that Adrian suffered. So alleged a wrongful death lawsuit filed in both states this week by Adrian's biological mother, maternal grandmother, and oldest sister contends that child services failed to keep Adrian out of harm's way. Despite all the warning signs, the hotline calls, and the evidence of the child's mistreatment, they effectively allowed his father and stepmother to continue to abuse, torture, and ultimately murder the little boy. while they stood idly by writing it all down, the family's lawyer claimed in the lawsuit. The lawsuit alleges that the state's intervention was limited to instructing Adrian's father and stepmother to sign a piece of paper agreeing to stop abusing the boy, the legal equivalence to a pinky promise or a pinky swear. Though officials in both states remained in regular contact, shared information, and continued to talk to the family, the spokeswoman said, adding that child welfare workers thoroughly investigated each reported incident of alleged abuse and neglect. Adrian's disturbing case prompted a state lawmaker to introduce legislation that would penalize adults who fail to report abuse at home. In this particular case, there are no strengths because the system failed. If the provisions of the child welfare policy were followed correctly, Adrian would have been removed from the abusive situation. The weakness of this situation is that the process was way too lengthy. Even though officials had documented proof, videos, people coming to them with things that they complaining about the noises that they heard and the things that they heard Adrian say, and Adrian even told himself what was going on. Adrian underwent treatment for disruptive behavior and parent-child relationship problems. His father and stepmother reported that Adrian frequently wet the bed and stole and hoarded food, picked at sores, and lit fires. And all of these are characteristics that are common in young victims of child abuse. The family temporarily moved to Missouri, where hotline calls continued. One caller reported that Adrian's stepmother would beat the living daylights out of him for no reason and would sell meth out of the home. Records show that Adrian opened up about the abuse to child welfare workers. At age 5, Adrian said his father would kick him so violently in the back of the head that a little bone came out. And this right here is why I feel like there were no strengths in this current situation. And the recommendation for policy change, in any case where there are any reports of suspected abuse, the child should immediately be removed and the state should right then and there investigate. I would lobby, as a social worker, to promote these changes. I would lobby for legislation that would support in removing a child from a situation of suspected abuse immediately, where he can be placed in protective custody prior to a complete state investigation. Thank you.